This episode is part of our ongoing series with NI Connections, where we interview an interesting person from Northern Ireland who's living and/or working overseas now. You can find hundreds of interviews and profiles with fascinating people who are proud to call this place home. And you can check out all of these things and sign up for their free email newsletter at niconnections.com. Thanks very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of today's episode. I mean, you have had multiple brushes since with, I'm going to call it terrorism. You had, and you also had you've had multiple interesting situations since then in Germany as well. So where would you like to go next? Do you want to take us to Iraq, or do you want to take us to Germany?
I don't mind going anywhere. I suppose Iraq is maybe the easiest one. I was in the Ibn al-Battar hospital in 1990, and we were in a situation where Saddam Hussein, as we know now retrospectively, had gassed the Kurds up in Halabja. But at the time, America and Britain blamed Iran for doing it. But when I was at home on March the 18th of 1990, the Sunday Times broke a story saying that it was probably Iraq that did this. Thank God we have very responsible, I suppose, news media and papers, because America would have loved the world to think that it was Iran, which it wasn't really. Even though she had sided with Iran before, you remember Contra deal and all the rest, she then was siding with Iraq in that war of the cities, which went on for 7 or 8 years. And we were living in Iraq in that period. And when you went to your bedroom at night, there was big X's all over your windows that if a missile struck, that the glass wouldn't come in on your bed. There was like duct tape all over the windows. So the reason that it sort of was of interest to me was the fact that, number one, the Sunday Times had broken that it probably was Iraq, and we were living in Iraq under a very dictatorial regime. The second thing is I had to smuggle back in the Sunday Times because they were searching for papers, because they knew that sort of that had broke. And believe it or not, I was lucky enough to get in a Sunday Times to Baghdad at the time. But we were a tertiary referral centre, and at night time I was getting in patients with effectively aplastic anemia and septicemia. So at night time we were in a situation where we were having to spike for blood cultures, and this was going on, at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning for a month or more. When I was covering that aspect, I was doing staff health in the hospital, and they were all from that area of Kurdistan, Suleimani, Halabja. So, yes, I wandered up into the area some months after that the whole event had happened, just to be there and document it. And now I've been in a lot of interesting places in my life. I was in Berlin when the wall came down. I was in Soweto during their riots. I was in Los Angeles during the riots. So if you see my memoir, I was in Lebanon when it was invaded. So I've been in a lot of interesting places. Some of them I went to on purpose just to be there, particularly with the fall of the Soviet Union. I was on my way down to Africa, and I went through Moscow and stayed there for 3 or 4 weeks. And when I went up to Halabja, I had to dress as a Kurd, almost like the Peshmerga, to be brought across the mountains. And on our way back, the Iraqi army had sort of sussed us out and arrested us. Now, the thing is that I make no bones about it. My driver, Mohammed, probably never seen the light of day, but that's, I suppose, the way things are or were. And I was in my cell one morning, and I'd been given a year's jail sentence at this stage, but it was just 5 days into it when this colonel came down, sat beside me, put a gun beside me, roughed me up a bit, nothing too bad, just in front of his mates and that, and said, do you think we're all barbarians here? And I said, no. And he turned around and he said to me, I know James Joyce. I know Trinity College in Dublin. And he said to me, I have cousins who have been to Dublin. And with that, he sort of caught my arm and threw me out the door. And I turned around, and it was quite a walk to where there was freedom in inverted commas. I'd across a big courtyard, and I wasn't sure, whether it gets shot in the back or not. It was one of those situations. And I just turned back and looked at him. He had a very stern face. I remember him still looking out the door at me. And I said, "Can I have my knapsack?" And he stood there for like 3 or 4 minutes just staring at me. And then he left, and then he opened the door and he threw out my knapsack. It was an orange one, and my camera. And they had pictures that I had taken of the oil fields in Kirkuk on the way up, and they thought that I was a spy for Britain or America. And that was what they had sort of held me and arrested me for with, they don't like reporters either, so you're almost better off never mentioning that you're a reporter. And I walked quite a distance to a taxi rank, and then I had, believe it or not, money still with me, and I took a taxi all the way to 700 kilometers back to Baghdad. And I got in contact with a friend of mine because I owed the taxi driver something. I didn't have too much on me. And Chris Duckling, who has died since of lymphoma, unfortunately, was a friend of mine, brought my stuff. I didn't even go back to the hospital. I flew to Copenhagen, was the first flight out. And I was playing guitar in an Irish bar 2 days later. Actually, the very next night. And then I was in Dublin 2 nights later, and we went down to the Galway races. I remember that. And that was August the 1st or August the 2nd, 1990. And it went on the TV that he had invaded Kuwait. So I was really extremely lucky from the point of view that all my friends in the hospital, about 450 nurses and doctors, were held as hostages.
We've spoken to hundreds of people on this show.
Yes.
And one of the things that we often talk about is how, being Irish coming from Ireland is a little bit of a superpower. What I'm saying is I've never met someone who can claim being Irish has actually saved their life. Is that man there?
Oh, yeah, I know what you mean.
James Joyce effectively got you off the hook there.
That's right.
You're just always there.
Grew up in Northern Ireland, what can I say?
How are you always there?